So now here is where it gets really weird, because you would think that rejecting things from our parent is a good thing. And you're like, please tell me it's a good thing. It's not. And there is a twist to rejection that we have to kind of look at. Daughters are either stuck absorbing their mother's habits and beliefs, or we reject them, but we run in the extreme opposite direction. What is super complicated about rejecting a toxic mother's qualities is that it's a black and white reaction that a little girl comes up with to avoid the horrific qualities, but that little girl will go into an extreme opposite direction. Let's meet two childhood trauma survivors. These two women are daughters of toxic mothers. We're going to call them Sarah and Amy. Let's first meet Sarah. Sarah is someone who finds herself in high conflict relationships with her friends, with her coworkers, and with men. She doesn't seek out these intense relationships, but she finds herself in a closeness with people who have issues, and specifically who don't want to look at their issues, which drives Sarah absolutely crazy. She's been conditioned into having to work with difficult people since her childhood. She grew up with an emotionally vacant father and a highly secretive mother who treated relationships like they were a game of chess. And she would especially do that with Sarah, whom the mother kind of had this like casual enemy energy with her. So there was contempt and there was antagonism from the mother aimed at Sarah. The mother was a workaholic. She liked to be seen as a do-gooder. She would help others. She would even help strangers, but she would ignore her children and big problems, while not believing that children needed connection and affection with her kids, which is super important. Kids need that. Sarah's mother could become violent if you called her out on her secrecy. Like the worst thing you could do is poke her about her secrecy or her motives. You were ruining something by questioning Sarah's mother. Sarah doesn't trust other women, but also feels like she needs to prove herself or prove something to other women. Sarah lives in survival mode and isn't comfortable resting or being chill. She struggles a lot with people's intentions and their motives. Like many childhood trauma survivors, Sarah lives in a perpetual, like, what the fuck state about people in general. What do people mean? It's extremely confusing to her. She doesn't get people, but she also doesn't see that she puts people on the spot. Hold on to that, because we're going to come back to that. Due to the kind of mother Sarah had, Sarah's inner child spends a lot of time trying to suss out the conspiracy about people. What are they hiding? What are they like avoiding in their own life? How hypocritical are they? When will they maybe turn on her? Sarah gets greatly triggered around people having a problem with her having a problem with them. Now let's meet Amy. Amy finds herself extremely lonely in most of her relationships. She only knows how to be available to people, but she hates being the focus. It's like the worst thing for her is to be the focus. She has her professional shit together, but she copes with her feelings through things like planning, work, being organized, and looking good. Amy hates not feeling like she is on top of things. She hates not feeling like she's in control. She doesn't push it with people like Sarah does. She more tries to kill them with kindness, and she will take on other people's issues instead like they were her own, where Sarah will freak out about people's issues. Very different in the two women. Amy wants healthy relationships, but feels blocked. Incapable or not worthy of them, like healthy relationships are for other people. And Amy often feels safer with men, but she also feels incredibly unseen by men. Amy gets greatly triggered around other people's emotions and not being able to fix those emotions for them. Amy grew up as the oldest of two with a highly neglectful and disorganized mother who struggled with substance abuse. The mother was kind of like a third child that Amy was in charge of, herself being included. Her mother was inconsistent and disorganized, but that mother also pretended like she had it together with the world for appearances. So there's a similarity there that we're going to come back to. Amy's mother would tell her everything about the family drama, the affairs that she was having, and confused Amy by sharing these things, making Amy feel special, but yet never showing up for her as a mother. Amy's mother would also break down in front of her sobbing about her problems, about the drama, about her friendships, about men. And Amy's mother treated Amy like she was a best friend, but that friend who was only there for her, not vice versa, which is a form of enmeshment. Amy got really good at looking like things were more normal in her life than they actually were as a little girl. She learned to hide the bad and assimilate into normal in her community as best as she could. School would never have known that her mother was that neglectful because Amy figured out how to look great and make excuses for the mother about why she didn't have her lunch that day, or field trip money, or a parent-teacher conference, or like a permission slip. She was a master at like shooing that stuff away so the adults wouldn't notice that she wasn't safe. Both Sarah and Amy had fathers who never talked to them about what their mother was like. Both women struggle with boundaries. Both women struggle with having the sense of self that they actually don't have yet. And okay, so here might be the most important part of this video. So really pay attention to what I'm about to say about the impact of having a toxic mother. How do you think Amy and Sarah might get along as coworkers or friends? How would Sarah and the what the fuck kind of hypervigilance that she has, how would that energy impact Amy, who takes in people's energy? As a side note, childhood trauma survivors, we greatly take in people's accusations. And we can see from earlier that Sarah might be free to give accusations, if that makes sense. How would Amy's fixing while avoiding herself affect Sarah, who is hypervigilant and highly sensitive to people hiding things? I would love to hear from you in the comments about how they might trigger each other and why. How might these two women actually trigger you if you don't relate to one of them, or if you relate to the problems or something like that? And speaking of problems, when a daughter has a toxic mother, there are three big lasting problems when a human being has a toxic parent. Their stories perfectly illustrate these three problems for daughters with toxic mothers. This video that you're watching is part 3 of a 4-part series. There are 2 prior videos that I go into length at discussing the 3 lasting problems, which I'll talk about here in just a second. So let's briefly plug in the 3 ideas and see how they apply to Sarah. The first of the big 3 problems is replication. Sarah is stuck replicating her mother's high conflict dynamics, constantly finding herself in battles she doesn't really want, but feels compelled to find out what people aren't being honest about. It makes sense if you remember what her mother was like. Amy is replicating her role as a caretaker, attracting people who need her but don't see her. While not a conscious choice, she finds herself still with people that make her feel lonely. The second of the big 3 lasting problems is the ongoing struggle that you might have with a toxic mother herself. Both women are still caught up trying to manage their relationship that is fundamentally one-sided with their mother. Sarah's mother still hides big pieces of information from her that drives her absolutely crazy, and Sarah is still stuck fighting with the OG hider in her life, which was her mother. Amy's mother still creates chaos and dysfunction, but then still expects a rescue from Amy without any insight to her mother's behavior. Amy's inner child believes her mother will fall apart without her, which is kind of true, but she is very much stuck in an enabling role with her mother. I'm not judging either woman for their stuck place here. The third and most important part is the damage we experience to our sense of self. Sarah's inner child believes that the world is a conspiracy that she kind of has to uncover like it's her job. Her sense of self is coming from a place of trauma as being a truth teller, but not a truth teller in such a great way where she puts people really on the spot, and it's coming from a not great place for her. I'm not saying telling the truth is bad. You'll hear more about that. Amy believes that she isn't worthy of healthy relationships that she sees other people have, and she struggles with a lot of shame around that. Amy's sense of self is about being selfless, and that's a paradox when you really think about it. So we're going to keep coming back to both of these women who have done their best in their adult lives, but their toxic mothers still impact their relationships and their sense of happiness. The cases of Sarah and Amy are not the only examples, as your story is going to be highly nuanced. But regardless of your gender or your sexual orientation, we will all relate a little bit to some piece of Sarah and some piece of Amy and what they went through as little kids, as daughters. These videos are for everybody. About this series that I mentioned earlier. So in this video, we're looking at the impact that a toxic mother has on a daughter. This is the third video in a 4-part series. The first video was toxic fathers and the impact that a toxic father has on a daughter. You can check out the link in the description of this video. The second video was toxic mothers and the impact that they have on their sons. The video that you're watching now is the third, and the fourth video, the final one, would be toxic fathers in the impact that they have on their sons, which I'm kind of looking forward to for being a son of a toxic father and having some thoughts about that. So to avoid a lot of repetition and give you the most important ideas right now, I've made this video about daughters and mothers shorter, but you won't miss anything and you'll still gain from the last 2 videos about the 5 types of parents, which are universal, and the big 3 lasting issues. And regardless of the gender of you and the parent that you're thinking of, these videos will still be applicable to you and give you answers about toxic family systems or family systems in general. So let's keep going. In addition to those big 3 lasting problems, Sarah and Amy's mothers have an impact on them in other areas. A toxic mother will have an impact on a daughter's sense of self. A toxic mother will have an impact on a daughter's mental health. A toxic mother will have an impact on a daughter's sense of other women, like we talked about. A toxic mother will have an impact on a daughter's replication and her projection of old issues onto people in her relationships. For Sarah, what all that would look like is that her sense of self is underdeveloped because how could she have a strong sense of self with a mother who perpetuated secrecy and lies? Her perception of self and others really got muddy there. She values being a truth teller, but she doesn't know herself really beyond being a truth teller due to that neglect and weirdness from her mother. A truth teller is both good and bad, and not so good though in a toxic family where we will have to tell it like it is and be that kid in the family that tells it like it is. But we're also doing that too much in adulthood. Sarah's mental health is about struggling with depression and extreme stress in relationships. And in general, at work, it feels like everything is an emergency to Sarah, related to how she grew up, like what's going to come at me next kind of a thing. And she lives in survival mode and is triggered by others. Sarah doesn't trust other women, even the ones that she does. Her inner child assumes that there's going to be some kind of betrayal coming at her in the future at some point from a woman. And for replication and projection, really important here, Sarah projects that people aren't truthful. And they are also going to be messing with her about the truth or lies or something. She tends to correct people. She tends to keep score. She is rooted in truth-telling too much, and she projects her mother's manipulative secrecy onto others. For Amy, those impacts, Amy's sense of self is also underdeveloped. It might seem like Sarah has a stronger sense of self, but Sarah's sense of self is more about hypervigilance instead of really knowing who she is. Amy doesn't know herself other than being available to other people and to be helpful, which she is, but often she doesn't know her needs or her other qualities, such that she's funny or she has interesting ideas or she has interest. She doesn't know those things because being available to people is so much part of her whole existence. Amy's mental health is also rooted in depression, but a lot of anxiety, a lot of control of the other emotions from her childhood that she isn't fully in tune with. Amy gets exhausted by other people around her and needs a lot of downtime, but feels guilty about needing that downtime. She feels like a failure about not fixing things for people. The worst thing for Amy is to not being able to drop everything for someone. Let me know if you relate to that, if you really relate to Amy's sense of survival in that way. Amy longs for connection with other women, but she gets freaked out at the slightest hint of any messiness in other women. And on top of not knowing what to do with healthy women, she wants a mother figure in her life. I mean, for those of us that didn't get it, we all want that. It's not weird. But receiving that kind of mother figure or being present for it brings up a lot of weird, enormous grief for her and discomfort. For replication and projection, Amy replicates being available to other people, just like how available she was to her mother, but she projects that people will demand that from her, and actually that they can't actually manage their own life on their own. It's not like Amy is condescending, but she assumes people are kind of helpless without her too, which is an issue. Amy automatically assumes she needs to fill the gaps in people's lives around her and piles that onto her to-do list. Sometimes she will overwhelm people with being duty-oriented, which is interesting in a way that both of these daughters were set up to somewhat be overwhelming in their relationships because they were overwhelmed. So let's pause and recap about what we covered so far. Sarah and Amy are childhood trauma survivors who had toxic mothers. There are 3 big lasting problems. There is replication, there is struggling in the present with a toxic mother, and the leftover beliefs that a daughter will have about her sense of self. Things like low self-esteem, or assuming it's our job to chase connection, or that women aren't safe. And we went over the impact. Both Sarah and Amy greatly struggle with their sense of self. Like, where is the line between them and others? Another issue with sense of self. Their mental health, their trust and relationships with other women, and how they project their toxic mother onto others, which is tricky. We all project our childhood trauma onto others. It's not judgment, it's just something that we do, and it's actually where most of our relational work is going to lie, is looking at how we project. So you might relate to this. You might even feel kind of called out by me about how specific these presentations are, but try to skip that for now. For right now, I want us to focus on one thing. I want you to put a heart in the comments about thinking of a little girl having to find ways of surviving that particular little girl, like Sarah or Amy, wouldn't have chosen if they were given a choice. Either women would have picked having a healthy, safe mother over having to navigate a toxic one. So often that's a very helpful concept when we think about our own shame about our stuck places or how we behave. Putting a heart in the comments is also what we need to do right now, which is look at what happened to us as children, instead of focusing just on how Sarah and Amy are stuck or difficult in relationships. The whole story is going to come into focus when we think about how these 2 women kind of got here as daughters of women like this. If you don't know me, I'm Patrick Tian. I'm an MSW, and this channel is all about childhood trauma, specifically around family of origin trauma as a system, as well as discovering ways to recover for better mental health, better relationships, better ways to feel about ourselves, find ourselves, uncover that lost sense of self, that kind of stuff. You can subscribe if you would like more content exploring family systems, how they impact us, and how to recover from them. So let's briefly go over the 5 types of toxic mothers. And again, you can find the types and characteristics which are universal in these videos in the series that I'm doing in the past 2 videos. But here they are again for quick reference. There is the unsafe perpetrator, or what I call a monster. A monster mother is profoundly damaging in various ways, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet. I'm literally meaning a monster. Then there is the non-protective absent mother, who is disinterested and distant. She does not protect and behaves as if her daughter is somebody else's child. Then there's the enmesher, which is the mother that puts her daughter in the role of her partner or her confidant, overshares. There can be a lot of victim, rescuer, persecutor dynamics in that relationship. The 4th one is the tragic codependent. That is the mother who is caught in an abusive relationship, but doesn't get out of it and doesn't protect her daughter from another abuser. She can seek solace in her daughter instead of making hard choices if they are available to her. That is not always black and white. That one is usually nuanced. The crazy maker is the abusive, disorganized mother who is immature, inconsistent, and unpredictable. Really like another child at your level who can really kind of blow up at you or make your life really crazy and miserable. Yes, they overlap, and yes, you can be up to like 3 or 4 of these, but the amount of overlap doesn't really matter for you in terms of severity. You'll see what I mean when I go through how this would apply to Sarah and Amy. Let's see how Sarah and Amy's mothers apply to these 5 types. Sarah's mother was unnecessarily secretive, antagonistic, and could become violent, which makes her 3 of the 5 types. We can even describe her as kind of an anti-love parent. She would qualify for a monster, maybe being the quiet type in the way that she could get violent, but also consistently absent and secretive kind of a thing. Like the violence wasn't consistent, only would be little pockets of it. In that same behavior, Sarah's mother would also be a crazy maker, because why lie when you can tell the truth? And why have your family live in all this weird pretense? Lastly, we can rightfully assume that Sarah's mother is non-protective and absent. She could be home every day with a mother like this, but you don't feel valued or seen. She's kind of shady and almost paranoid, but keeping secrets, so she isn't an open, healthy, loving mother that could mirror in a healthy way for what was going on with Sarah. So we often forget with an antagonistic parent and a parent who we get contempt from that there's also a lot of neglect in that parental relationship right behind those things that are kind of in your face. That's kind of that anti-love piece, as well as not valuing affection, attunement, and attachment, that a parent doesn't value those things. So much neglect we kind of forget about because the parent is just so in our face and kind of miserable. Sarah's mother doesn't fall into enmeshment because there's actually a deficit of mother-daughter bond. There isn't anything going on there to be enmeshed about anything. And the mother is so mentally off about trust anyway. She also isn't a tragic codependent looking for a rescue from herself, or say with an abusive husband or partner. That would mean looking weak for Sarah's mother, and that would never fly. Now let's look at Amy's mother. Very different from Sarah's, and is primarily enmeshed due to the inappropriate sharing she does with Amy, and also being a crazy maker about the messy dysfunction, but also the major crazy making being pretending to have it more together than she actually does. Secondly, what she has actually in common with Sarah's mother is that she's also non-protective and absent. Amy's mother did not care who Amy was hanging out with as early as 11 when she would try to get attention from older kids and older adults. Amy's mother is not a monster in that there is an absence of that in-your-face kind of aggression or contempt. Doesn't matter so much because there's so much damage in other places. She also is not a tragic codependent because she didn't come across as like a victim about Amy's father, who was not a monster either. Her parents were just kind of ships in the night. I'm alluding to a video I did called 7 Toxic Type of Family Systems that I'll also put in link to the description. There's the anti-love family, then there's like the ships in the night family. So the ships in the night family is living separate lives. And, Amy's parents parented their children in the same way. No connection. Everyone's doing their own thing. But from Amy's mother, there wasn't this "your father was ruining my life" kind of vibe. Amy's mother just overshared from a place of like gossip and called it fun when it was way too much for Amy as a little girl. So let's reflect on something important right now. If you were in a therapy group hearing Sarah and Amy's story, who would you think had it worse? Do you think Sarah's secretive and aggressive mother would cause more damage than Amy's oversharing, messy, neglectful mother who pretended to have it more together? It's kind of a trick question that I'm giving you here, and I'm sorry about that, but neither of them as little girls were safe. And of course they struggle as they do when they're present. Why I ask is our brains in such situations, when we think about these two women, place our own bias about who had it worst based upon our own stories. As young girls, both didn't have a safe home base to come home to, both were neglected, both had to navigate a very unhinged parent. But we tend to miss the similarities when we are focusing on the differences. And yes, differences are valid, but also the similarities are more valid, I think. In other words, having to become a truth teller or becoming a people pleaser, or I'm getting sick of that word, or a fixer is the same in the way that they are survival strategies to make it through childhood. So thinking about these two women in a group that maybe you're a part of, you might witness Sarah if she was feeling triggered or kind of callous. She might tell Amy, like if they were in conflict with each other, well, at least your mother talked to you. And Amy, in a moment of freak out or anger, might tell Sarah, well, at least your mother didn't tell you everything. So we kind of can insert our bias as childhood trauma survivors. That's that projection stuff in a way that comes up in our relationships, and especially when we tend to think about maybe who had it worse. We got to be careful with that. It's just what I'm sort of saying. Now, I want to talk about a framework for healing and change called Absorb and Reject. Here is a framework and an exercise that was extremely helpful to me about separating ourselves from a toxic mother's impact, but we have to get real about that mother's influence. There are just some things we can't escape from when we have a toxic mother. In 10 years when I was in private practice, nearly every client absorbed issues from an abusive mother, as well as rejected issues that kind of become a new version of dysfunction. And this is true for all genders. Same for the other parent. We absorb and we reject from the other parent too, like a father, mother, it doesn't matter. Some examples. Daughters can absorb distrust of other women from their mother, where distrust of other women is learned. Daughters can absorb the habit of oversharing and having poor boundaries from their mother. In reverse of that, daughters can reject cowardice or secrecy, like we see in Sarah from a toxic mother, but they can overdo it by becoming truth tellers and overly challenging others. Daughters can also reject shallow coldness from their mothers, but they might become too open, too loving, too caring, and they can be greatly taken advantage of, maybe like what we see with Amy. We all have our things that we absorbed that are unique to us and unique to our mother, actually. That's the hard part, is admitting these things, but it happens to all of us. To share a little bit, I absorbed my mother's reactivity, and I would freak out on you if I felt that you were letting me down before I did any treatment on myself. It's really what she taught me about relationships. If you felt like someone wasn't stepping up, you could just freak out at them and let them have it. And I felt immense shame about that when I realized what was going on. So that's absorption. So now here is where it gets really weird, because you would think that rejecting things from our parent is a good thing. And you're like, please tell me it's a good thing. It's not. And there is a twist to rejection that we have to kind of look at. Daughters are either stuck absorbing their mother's habits and beliefs, or we reject them, but we run in the extreme opposite direction. What is super complicated about rejecting a toxic mother's qualities is that it's a black and white reaction that a little girl comes up with to avoid the horrific qualities, but that little girl will go into an extreme opposite direction. An example is, say you have a mother who used people, manipulated them, or used them as like narcissistic supply. When we reject that quality in a mother, because as kids we saw it, we hated it, we died like 1,000 times witnessing our mother use people, and it's icky. But as little kids, as a daughter, we don't choose a healthy way, like choosing healthy give and take in our relationships, because we don't know what that looks like. Did you see healthy give and take as a little girl? I didn't. I had no concept of what that would look like. So as daughters and sons, we don't have great options because our thinking is black and white. We don't want to use people like our mother because we see that and we hate it, but we're as young as like 3 and 4 years old, and we don't have healthy adults around to teach us what healthy give and take would look like. So we choose a black and white, kind of an immature option as best as we can. It's the best thing we could come up with, and actually it kind of worked until it stops working in our adulthood. So option A is what we recoil from, like what our mother is like. Option B would require adults modeling how that works, and there's no luck for us there. So we choose option C, which is a strategy we can do in the moment to avoid the shame of how our mother behaved and kind of reject her and reject all that. If you've ever told yourself, I'm never going to use people, or having needs is wrong and mean, I shouldn't have them, so I'm just never going to have any needs ever. So you could see a child coming up with that. How would absorbing and rejection apply to Sarah and Amy? For Sarah, she had to absorb her mother's intensity and her aggression and also distrust. Also, while Sarah tries, she ends up in kind of a similar place to her mother. She's at odds with people. It's something in the neighborhood of like paranoia, but not quite. And these are really hard things to admit for Sarah, but they're also the way out of maybe her trauma. Is she her mother? No. Absolutely not. But these are just unavoidable things that we learn from them that we're going to require Sarah to look at this stuff. And about rejection, Sarah rightfully rejected her mother's avoidance of real issues. She was brave in that way. She rejected her mother's selfish dishonesty about everything and the inauthenticity of helping strangers just to look good. You know, she gave a big F that to all of those behaviors, which is like good for her. But while on paper, all those things are good things to reject for Sarah, Sarah overdoes it in ways that she puts people on the spot and about demanding for them to be more authentic. She became somebody who could rock the boat, but she's also someone who would tip the boat over, if that makes sense. In Sarah's work, she kind of has to look at that she has business to finish with her mother that she tries to fix through other people. Amy's going to do her own version of that. That's the biggest takeaway. And we all have some kind of personal, subconscious version of our rejection and our absorption. Now, Amy. Amy absorbed being disconnected. Her mother's substance abuse modeled disconnection despite the enmeshment that was going on, which isn't really about real connection. Her mother was even disconnected to herself because of the substance abuse. That's really huge when you think about it. Can you relate to the idea of your own parent not being home to themselves or aware of themselves? She also learned to pretend things that were fine when they actually weren't. She absorbed that from her mother. She also had a mother who had not only neglected her kids, but a mother who neglected her own self-care, like her sobriety, relationships, sanity, all that stuff. And again, not easy to admit, but when we grow up in these families, we unfortunately don't walk away unscathed from absorption. But Amy rejected being messy, and good for her, right? And she got herself together in her life. That's actually great and even miraculous given how she grew up. But she doesn't use people. She shows up for them. She loathes instability. And her worst triggers are about people seeing her cry because it means that she's out of control. That all kind of sounds good, right? It's actually not that good. And it's related to her rejection of her mother's qualities. It's just evidence of heartbreak in a child's strategy who wasn't safe. Amy might say, I can't be messy and I can't be emotional. I can't not help people because it's my job to help people. Who cares about me? I don't matter. I don't need people to care about me. Let's check in a little bit to take the pressure off. I know this is a lot. Please know our inner child can freak out about thinking, I'm like my mother because I don't connect with people, or I'm like her because I'm bitter like she was, or whatever. But you're not. You're watching this video trying to find some answers and have a different life. Would your mother ever watch a video like this, looking at this stuff? My mother wouldn't. Leave a comment if you relate to that fear, and just leave a comment that says, I'm not my mother, and take that pressure off yourself because you're not. What is the healthy middle around absorption and rejection? What do we do with those two things? Where is the healthy middle ground? The most important thing I want you to take in right now is you did an incredible job as a little girl picking a strategy that you could do, like not needing help, not having needs, not letting someone BS you like Sarah's mother did to her. And as kids, we had nothing to work with, and we came up with what worked until it stopped working in our adulthood and our relationships. That's where that hyper independence doesn't work anymore, or calling people out so much doesn't really work anymore. And we find ourselves in a lonely place, not having real intimacy in our lives. So you did the right thing since you had no help from healthy adults, just like I did. Hyper independence is just an example. You could have chosen being extremely kind and generous while also not being able to accept the same kind of energy from others. So it really is going to be unique to you, not just what Sarah and Amy experience, even if you relate to them. So it really comes down to exploring our own strategy that you came up with and rejecting qualities about your mother. But now, as we work on ourselves, what would the healthy middle ground look like for you? If we're not absorbing in rejection, like how do we find healthy new ways? What would good enough trust of other women look like for you if you struggle trusting them? What would separating drama from gossip and realizing that it's actually realness, that you might need, what would that look like? Where you don't feel icky afterward, thinking you were telling somebody secrets or gossiping when you actually needed to talk about a problem? What would not judging others so much and accepting people's humanity look like? What feels dangerous about that to you if you relate to that? What would being more comfortable with not fixing people so much, or not overly taking in the energy from others and feeling good enough about separateness from people? And if we're not our mothers, who actually are we? Remember that idea from earlier about the impact on our sense of self. If we're not absorbing and rejecting that old stuff that's in our subconscious, what is really the alternative? The work of being healthy is about finding the healthy middle ground. Here are some healing goals. Let's plug in some directions and goals for Sarah and Amy regarding absorption and rejection. For Sarah, it's going to really involve really challenging her own values about how to be in a relationship, recognizing that her intensity is going to be killing intimacy. Sarah's intensity comes from finding that conspiracy in other people. It's how she relates to other people. A good goal would be to learn new ways of relating without trying to find something out, as well as practicing trust and separating her mother from the other people in her present life. She's hypervigilant about distrust. Can her inner adult find ways to point out the ways that someone actually is trustworthy and not be so focused on the ways that they're not? Being superior is a way to not kind of need people. That's really a big one. We can create distance with people either by being superior or even helping them, like we see with Amy, by focusing on someone's faults or focusing on what they need. It keeps us safe, but it kills intimacy at the same time. For Sarah's rejection goals to work on that is to simply let people have their own process, their own decision making, instead of kind of like trying to force them into some kind of insightful idea. Being a truth teller can also mean to be controlling. She might date a shutdown person and try to beat them up with the idea that they need therapy instead of letting that person come to that realization themselves. It's about kind of her energy that she brings into it. Another thing about the rejection is choosing honesty versus boundaries. She rejects dishonesty, but she tries to get people to come clean with her. The boundary would be a self boundary within Sarah's self of not trying to be somebody's therapist. And lastly is being okay with how much realness that the people around her can actually handle, not trying to force them into more realness. Wounded inner children can try to save people or coach them, but a wounded inner child doesn't have the ability to see someone's limitation, or that maybe they're not interested in that, or knowing they're too early in their process, in knowing what maybe you know. So who out there has dated someone trying to get through to them? And it's like your main mission in life is trying to awaken somebody. Might you be trying to get a parent to wake up? If you had the ability to let that go or not take that on, what would that look like for you? What would that healthy middle ground be instead of trying to fix a parent through a person, which is something a lot of us just do? For Amy, in terms of absorption and rejection, instead of continuing with things she absorbs, some goals would be places to learn real intimacy. Amy is a child in neglect. A therapy group would be uncomfortable at first, but probably really good for her to learn how to be the focus. And instead of giving focus only, which generally comes up in a good psychotherapy group if it's good. Amy would also benefit from starting to value not being okay, and that it's safe to not be okay. Because remember, she controls her emotions. She plans things out. She avoids her emotions. She doesn't want that stuff to bubble up and feel it. And it would be an amazing goal for her to sit and be okay with not being okay and separate out her childhood where she really wasn't okay from her present where she can be okay in her present. She's safer now because she's not living with that mother or being a powerless little girl. We're all entitled to get messy from time to time, which is so human. Another great goal for Amy would be exposure to self-care. Like many childhood trauma survivors, especially in my own story, Amy might not know how to rest or take a vacation, or even simple as get a massage somewhere or do some kind of holistic treatment for being greatly uncomfortable and feel guilty that she's not being productive. Many of us can be super focused on being productive because it's just a way to kind of not feel our feelings. It's a way to avoid our feelings and to avoid our body. Here are some rejection-based goals. First is reclaiming being messy. She overly values having it together. It's impossible to have it together all the time. Reclaiming being messy, and again, maybe a group could be helpful for that, which just means in this case to allow herself to cry. And it would be an amazing goal and an actual therapy practice for her to do on her own, as well as it being very helpful if she were to have a witness like a therapist or a group. Having a witness in our process can greatly speed up becoming more comfortable with our feelings. Choosing her inner child over choosing to help others. This would be like working on an addiction kind of for Amy, to have a practice for a while of saying no, or having a practice of only focusing on herself and her own emotions for a while and taking care of those other emotions instead of being a radar for other people's emotions. Another is simply practicing not having control. I think a good therapist would try to have Amy celebrate moments of not having control. A coworker seems sad. A boss asks her to take on something that she says no to and deals with the aftermath. She goes home to her apartment and doesn't take action on something immediately just to get it done. That kind of a thing. So you've made it this far. We are now coming into the final thoughts. There's something I really want you to walk away is feeling seen here. I know you weren't safe as a little girl, and I know you're not your mother. A lot of this stuff is confronting and scary, but again, we wouldn't have chosen these things as little kids. These were things that we needed to do. We wouldn't have chosen to be intense or distrusting. We would have picked a safe childhood over one where we had to heal all the adults or watch out for them or to be totally selfless or to find out like what they're hiding, all that stuff. But the work now is that we are responsible for how we want to be in the world, which is greatly complicated by the impact of having a toxic mother and our triggers. While I know therapy isn't available to everybody and that there are issues with therapy, it may not have worked for you in the past or it's not available, I totally get that. But I still do need to say it's still my first line of recommendations in terms of how I think this stuff can really change. Not the only way, but it is the first thing I recommend. Why I stress it in nearly every video is that it's funny, but it's a group of people like an abusive family about why we have childhood trauma. And for Sarah and Amy, we can see it's really about as little girls being disconnected from themselves while not being connected to caring people. So that's pretty much why I often recommend, whether it's a group or a therapist or some way, I think childhood trauma survivors need some sense of witnessing and community. So that being said, I would love to know what stood out for you most in this video. What is something that you might have learned about yourself as a problem and how it maybe relates to your mother in terms of something that you maybe absorbed or something you're rejecting against, but you're kind of running in a dysfunctional direction with it? I would love to know. And also, I have 2 resources for you. The first is about an exercise on absorption and rejection. I learned the exercise in a book called No One Is to Blame by Bob Hoffman. It's an incredible book, but it's also kind of hard to find these days. It might be out of print, that kind of a thing, but it's very, very good. Some stuff I don't fully agree with it, but it was an excellent book. The exercise is about creating a list of negative personality adjectives in your parent. These are words like they were bossy, they were boisterous, they were kind of bragging all the time, they were naive, they were cowardly. I'll put a link in the description of this video of negative personality traits that you can get some ideas from. It's actually really helpful. From that list, you circle the traits that maybe you absorbed, and then you underline or cross out the traits that you rejected. When I did this exercise, I didn't really think of how my father really influenced me beyond me really hating him because he was really abusive, but I absorbed that he was avoidant in relationships. Like we kind of saw with Amy. And learning that about myself was really tough, but also incredibly helpful in shifting out of avoiding relationships. I rejected his aggression and his coldness, but I also became wide open and people could take advantage of me. This list is extremely helpful to give you a place to start with. And a simple example is like the word bragging. If you had a parent who loved talking about themselves, you would underline that word and put it in a list of what you rejected. And then you reflect on that and you're thinking like, oh, that's why I really fucking hate talking about myself. So you write out these things that you absorbed as well as what you rejected, and you come up with another column about what you kind of do instead when it comes to rejection and how that is dysfunctional for you, such as not being able to take a compliment or something like that. I'm going to have these explicit directions in the video description for you, but here's what they are. You go over this whole list and you write down the traits of your toxic mother. You circle what you absorbed. And then as a therapy idea is write out the opposite of what that absorption word would be and see how that feels to you. Like an example of Sarah, like if she absorbed something like telling people off or telling the truth or being way too vocal, what might it feel for Sarah to not do that as a way to like, that's looking at her values. Then what you do is you underline what you rejected. Write out what the opposite of that word would be. Like if you rejected being pushy, what is the opposite of being pushy? You can then use that list in your learning about yourself and also working with your inner child about establishing new values. Your inner child might confuse stating a preference as being pushy. That's kind of a value issue that you can work with. I really had to see that my being avoidant in relationships wasn't good. I thought I just needed a lot of downtime and a lot of space, but I really had to work with that, understanding where it come from and why. What you could do is you can also keep that list handy that you came up with and refer back to it when you're triggered, specifically around relationships. Or you can even bring that list into therapy to kind of discuss it if that's available to you. The other resource that I have is a workbook I just released on the most prevalent childhood trauma issues that are applicable to everything we went over in this video for daughters of toxic mothers. It consists of educational text, which teaches you about the issue. It also consists of journal prompts to get you to think about the issue differently. And most importantly, the workbook consists of inner child dialoguing where you get to work on these issues. This workbook has currently become my most sought after resource next to the videos that you're watching, and you can find it like right up there. I hope this video was helpful to you, and I know this was a lot to get through. The stuff that is reflective and challenging is what leads to the most growth in our lives. And there is one more left in the series, which is toxic fathers and their impact on sons. And we'll do the same thing in that video about how men feel about men, which I'm kind of excited to talk about. Did this video make you think about how you personally feel about women or how you feel about yourself? Did hearing Amy or Sarah's story make you think differently about intensity or people-pleasing? Have you ever had a friend like Sarah or Amy, and what was that friend like for you? Do you see them differently now? Those questions are for you to maybe kind of think about. As a daughter, try to take this video and the community that's watching it with you and make your mother so much more smaller in your mind if you had a toxic mother. Her impact doesn't have to keep taking you outside of yourself. And if you really want to take your power back from a toxic mother, do the work here about getting rid of the things that you had to absorb from her, as well as reclaiming new values and reclaiming new ideas about the things that you rejected when you ran in the opposite way, like we all do. That's going to be hard work, but it's really worth it. You didn't get to choose those things anyway. So maybe drop in the comments right now, I'm taking my power back from my mother. And you're already doing that in how you're living your life, but just maybe make it a known statement in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching me. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease, and may you be joyous. And I will see you next time.